I spent much of my life believing I understood the secrets hidden among the trees. I thought I could interpret the subtle whisper of leaves when rain approached, or the sudden silence that announced a predator's presence. But the forest holds silences that don't belong to nature, silences that seem to suspend the air, as if something invisible is watching every breath. My name is Jonas Whitaker. I'm 44 years old, and I come from a long line of indigenous people from the Appalachian region. For 9 years, I served in the Navy's Special Forces, covert missions, operations that never made the news. When I left that world of shadows, I imagined I'd take on something peaceful. I accepted a job as a forest ranger, thinking I'd spend my days surrounded by pines and streams, not horrors lurking in the mist. I was wrong. A few years later, I got a call that completely changed my sense of safety. The government needed someone with experience. What they told me was too simple: locate and contain dangerous animals. But they didn't specify what kind of creature awaited me. The call came on a foggy morning. I was in the backyard of my cabin near the small town of Waynerville, North Carolina, fixing an old fence. In the background, the Smoky Mountains rested silently, like sleeping sentinels. The message was straightforward: multiple disappearances near the Pine Hollow Trail, a region known for its beauty, and now, for frightened whispers. Locals claimed to have seen something they called the Gray Wanderer, a figure moving slowly through the mist-covered trees. Tall, heavy, walking on 2 legs. I wanted to believe it was a stray black bear or a lost elk. That would be easier to accept than the idea of a monster. But when that unit calls, there's no refusing. That night, I packed only the essentials: rifle, flare, thermal scope, rations for 3 days. At the crack of dawn, a helicopter dropped me off at the edge of Cove Creek. The smell of wet earth mingled with the scent of conifers, and the fog was so thick it seemed to cling to the treetops with invisible claws. I stood there, silent, trying to hear any sound that might reveal life: the hum of insects, the rustle of small animals, even the snap of branches in the wind. Nothing. It was as if the entire forest had held its breath to watch me. Before I go on, I want you to do something. Tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. Now imagine being in my place, alone, surrounded by a silence that feels heavy, the damp ground under your boots and the chilling sense that you're not alone. The locals called it the Gray, but what we saw that night, it wasn't gray. It was pale, almost translucent, like something that had never felt the sun's touch. And when we realized it was hunting us, it was too late. That thing knew our names. If you're getting chills just imagining it, take a moment. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video so more people can hear this real and dark story. Your interaction helps keep these narratives alive and reach those who need to hear them. The next morning, I was taken to a federal facility hidden on the outskirts of Asheville, a few miles from the mountains. From the outside, it looked like just another forgotten warehouse. Gray walls, no sign, no flag, just a metal door that creaked as if it guarded secrets too heavy for the world. As I crossed the narrow hallway, the smell of burnt coffee and rusted metal hit me. The lights flickered in yellowish tones, and the constant hum of recycled air conditioning, a sound you only hear in places meant to stay off official records, filled the space. In the meeting room, 4 faces awaited me. They weren't amateurs. Agent Sophia Raddick, tall, with a gaze as sharp as a freshly honed blade. Trained in field biology, she wore the skepticism of someone who only believed what could be proven under a microscope. Jacob Hawk Renz, a former Marine, sat beside her. His rigid posture betrayed a man who'd seen more than he cared to remember. In the back, leaning against a steel wall, was Evan Cole, too young to be there, but with restless fingers typing on a tablet as if the world were a sequence of codes waiting to be cracked. The last was the local sheriff, Dale Hargrove, haggard face, deep dark circles, trembling hands. He opened a thick folder on the table. He didn't say good morning, didn't offer coffee. He just let the photos speak. 5 missing, he muttered. 3 tourists, 2 locals, all in less than a month. The first image showed a camping tent torn in half as if a machine had ripped through it. The second, a patch of scorched earth, burned from the inside out, as if something had emerged from the ground. Sophia frowned. Bear attack? The sheriff shook his head slowly. Bears don't do this, and they sure as hell don't drag cattle uphill. He slid another photo forward. It was the body of a cow, or what was left of it. The ribs were splayed open like petals of a grotesque flower. Around it, the ground was trampled, but there were no tracks, no signs of a struggle. Jacob leaned in, eyes narrowed. Where was this taken? Near Cove Creek. But there are similar reports at Sliding Rock, the sheriff said, taking a deep breath. Screams in the middle of the night. Sounds like they're coming from underwater. A heavy silence fell over the room. Sophia crossed her arms, visibly uncomfortable. Could be a sick predator. Territorial. Maybe wolves, she said. Dale let out a short, dry laugh. If that's a wolf, it weighs as much as a car. He pulled out the final image. A thermal scan, captured by a drone 2 days prior. The shape on the screen was indistinct, but real. Hunched, long, walking upright. The recorded temperature, 200 degrees Fahrenheit, was impossible for any natural creature. Evan tilted his tablet toward us. This isn't biological heat. It's machine heat, or something that doesn't want to be found. I stared at that silhouette for long seconds. It wasn't just the shape that unnerved me. It was how it moved. Something followed behind it. Smaller shapes, as if it wasn't alone. The sheriff massaged his temples, exhausted. We've blocked the area off to tourists. Told them there's a landslide risk, but he paused, looking directly at me. You've dealt with things like this before, Whitaker. What do you make of it? I wanted to tell the truth, that I had no idea what we were facing. But they didn't call me to doubt. They called me to hunt. We'll find it, I said with the coldness they expected to hear, and contain it. Sophia was already jotting down details in her field notebook. Jacob adjusted his rifle without a word. Evan tucked away his tablet, restless. That's when I noticed something small, but wrong. On the back of one of the photos, there was a note scribbled in black ink. Unit recovered. 2 days ago. Recovered. Not tracked. Not eliminated. Recovered. In that moment, I understood. We weren't going after an animal. We were going to retrieve something the government already knew existed. Something that was still moving. We headed into the mountains late that afternoon. The road cutting through the forest wound between living walls of pines and oaks. The rain had stopped hours earlier, but the air remained heavy, damp, almost sticky, as if the forest itself were sweating in silence. The fog crept along the ground, thick enough to blur the landscape's edges. Each curve seemed to swallow us deeper into a territory that didn't belong to humans. Inside the vehicle, no one spoke, just the muffled sound of tires rolling over puddles and the engine echoing on the empty road. I looked out the window and saw twisted trunks like columns of an ancient cathedral. The forest seemed to breathe. As we passed a small roadside diner, a few people stood outside. 3 men, simple clothes, lit cigarettes, eyes fixed on the ground. None of them greeted us. None looked up. It was as if the presence of our vehicles reminded them of something they'd rather pretend didn't exist. Their reaction said more than any words. They knew, and they were silent out of fear. We reached the area known as Ridge Loop, where the trail narrows and the vegetation closes in, as if hiding something. The sun was sinking slowly, casting everything in shades of blue and gray. The fog rose from the valleys like a living creature, coiling around branches and covering every stone, every trunk. It was like stepping into a place where time didn't move at the same speed as the rest of the world. We decided to set up camp near a stream, where the terrain was flat enough to pitch tents and install sensors. Sophia, meticulous as ever, knelt by the bank and began collecting samples of soggy soil, her gloves stained with dark, almost black mud. Jacob patrolled the perimeter with the calm of someone who'd been in wars, and learned to sense danger even when it was still invisible. Evan unpacked the motion sensors, small black discs with blinking blue lights that looked like alien technology planted in the midst of ancient wilderness. While helping him attach one to a damp, cold trunk, I asked if those devices had ever failed. He answered without taking his eyes off the tablet. Only when something interferes with the signal. That's when I noticed. The forest was mute. No croaking frogs, no buzzing insects, no rustling branches, nothing but our own breathing and the wind dragging mist through the trees. When those sounds vanish, something's wrong. Nature only goes silent like that when it senses something bigger than itself. Jacob called me with a low, grave tone. Come see this. A few meters from the stream in the wet mud were deep marks in the ground. At first I thought they were human footprints, maybe from a lost hiker, but as I got closer, I realized they were too large, wide, disproportionate, and, most disturbing, with only 2 thick toes, ending in sharp curved edges like blades. The heel was narrow, and the weight distribution was wrong. It wasn't a quadruped. It was something that walked upright, but shouldn't. Sophia shone her flashlight on the print. The trembling beam reflected off the hardened edges of compacted mud. "This isn't an overlap of paws," she whispered. "Whatever this is, it's strong." I thought about what could leave tracks like that. No bear, no elk, no known predator. I'd seen dangerous animals' tracks before, but this looked made to tear. Meanwhile, the sensors started blinking faster. Evan, frowning, typed frantically on the monitor. "Detecting movement," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Could be deer. Or is not." The sky darkened completely. The tents were pitched in a circle near the fire, but no one relaxed. The wood crackled, sending sparks that vanished into the fog. Even so, the heat seemed unable to escape the circle of light. The forest's cold was stronger than the fire. The fog, which had been crawling along the ground, began to rise. It coiled around our legs as if probing us. Evan tried to explain it rationally, talked about thermal variation condensation, but his words sounded too small against what we were feeling. The forest seemed to be watching us, not with eyes, but with presence. Jacob kept his weapon close to his chest. The fire's flame flickered weakly, and I had the strange sensation that the night was swallowing the light, as if nothing there could shine for long. And then, the breeze shifted. First a light gust, then a denser, heavier wind that made the fog swirl in spirals. I felt the air cut through my body, cold and slow, as if the forest had taken a deep breath, and then exhaled. Every branch, every leaf, every tree seemed to lean toward us. There was no doubt something was out there, silent, patient, waiting. When dawn broke, the fog that had blanketed the forest began to lift slowly, as if retreating by its own will. Still, it left a cold, heavy, damp trail in the air that clung to the skin like a silent warning that we were being watched. The sky was covered with low gray clouds, and the mountains looked like giant shadows wrapped in a mantle of ancient smoke. We followed the narrow dirt road toward Grave Hollow, an old clearing known among locals as the Valley of the Dead. The name had always bothered me, but now it made more sense than ever. The trees' branches in that area didn't grow straight. They were twisted, as if they'd tried to escape something coming from beneath the earth. The trunks were scorched in parts, black and leaning, resembling bones rising from a forgotten graveyard. As we descended the trail, the smell began to change. First, a faint scent of wet earth, then an underlying metallic tang, like old rust mixed with blood. With each step, the air grew denser. It was a smell the body recognizes before the mind understands. A smell that only appears when life has been ripped away brutally. It didn't take long to find the remains of the campsite where the last people had been seen alive. The tents were destroyed, not torn, shredded. The metal poles were bent with surgical force as if giant hands had crushed each one. The sleeping bags were ripped open, scattered in the mud like the plumage of hunted birds. A piece of tarp still fluttered in the wind, caught on a broken branch. Everything there exuded the sense that no one had time to flee. Sophia walked slowly, her body tense, eyes scanning every detail on the ground. She knelt by the edge of a small stream cutting through the campsite and dipped her gloves into reddish water. "Blood," she murmured. Her voice was too low to be just stating a fact. It was the whisper of someone realizing the threat was still close. Jacob, crouched near the trees, examined the ground. "No drag marks," he said, looking up at me. "No one crawled. No one ran. Whatever it was, it carried everything." That word hung over us like a funeral bell. Carried. Predators attack and feed on sight. Only monsters take away. I approached one of the trees at the edge of the clearing. Something on the bark caught my eye. The wood was scratched, as if strips had been torn off. I touched the spot with my gloved fingers and felt an unnatural cold, as if the heat from my body was being sucked away. Caught in the crevice was a tuft of coarse, metallic hair. Its color was a strange, shimmering gray, reflecting the pale morning light. Sophia came over with a collection bag. She picked up a strand between her fingers and frowned. "This isn't normal hair," she said, turning it between her fingers. "It has an organic structure, but it feels synthetic. I've never seen anything like it." Before I could respond, Evan's voice echoed from the other side of the campsite. "Guys, you need to see this." I looked around. The sensors he'd set up the previous night, the small discs with blue lights, were now blinking irregularly, as if something in the forest was interfering with them. Blue, red, black, off. Evan tapped one, trying to reactivate it. Nothing worked. "This isn't normal interference," he said, staring at the tablet's screen. "It's like There's an invisible field draining the signal. I felt the pressure in the air before hearing any sound. The light between the trees seemed distorted, as if space itself was bending slightly, making it hard to see. The silence, already eerie, grew even deeper. Even the wind vanished. It was like being trapped inside a giant lung, waiting for the next breath. Jacob gripped his rifle tighter, his jaw clenched. "Whatever's out there, it's not far," he said. Sophia shot him a hard look as if still searching for a scientific explanation, but even she knew this forest no longer followed the rules of the natural world. Time seemed to stretch. A single sound pierced the void, the solitary caw of a crow. Then the wind returned, bringing a thick putrid smell, like meat left to rot in the dark. The odor enveloped us. I recognized it instantly. It was the smell of a predator that doesn't hunt, but collects. The sensors blinked frantically. The sound from Evan's tablet died, and then total silence. Up above, beyond the curve of the slope, a muffled, dragging sound emerged, like something heavy being pulled through the trees. Something alive, something enormous. The sound started as a distant whisper, almost imperceptible, a slow drag blending with the wind as if the forest were breathing through some hidden mouth. But the more we listened, the clearer it became. Someone or something was moving above the slope, dragging something heavy across the ground covered with wet leaves. Jacob was the first to react. He straightened slowly, eyes fixed on the sound's direction, and raised his weapon like someone who'd already recognized danger before seeing it. Sophia turned off her flashlight with a quick motion, as if instinctively knowing the light could give us away. Evan dimmed his screen, and the forest plunged into near-total darkness. The only light came from the sky. A bluish-gray filtered through the fog, just enough to draw vague, distorted shapes among the trunks. The trees seemed closer than before. It was as if the forest itself was closing in on us. That's when I realized the silence had weight. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was something pressing on the lungs, making each breath shorter, more controlled. The entire forest seemed to be waiting, just like us. "Movement at 40 meters, Evan whispered, glancing at the screen before it flickered and went dead. "No, 30. It's coming." The fog on the slope began to move unnaturally, as if something were carving a path through it. First, a faint tremor in the leaves, then branches snapping, not in bursts, but with rhythm, like heavy, calculated steps. Each crack was distinct, the sound of a predator that knew we were listening and didn't care. "No lights," I whispered. "No one shoots until we see it." Sophia held her breath. Jacob kept his aim steady. Evan was trembling. I could hear his teeth chattering, not from cold, but from real fear. Then we saw it, or thought we saw it. A tall shadow emerged behind a row of trees. It wasn't the light that revealed it. It was how the fog parted around it, as if a solid body were pushing through the air and bending the mist. Two long arms stood out first, disproportionate, dragging almost to the ground. The head seemed elongated with something glinting faintly, a pale, cold reflection, like wet bones under moonlight. Jacob gripped his rifle tighter against his shoulder. I could feel the tension radiating from him as if he were holding the world's breath. "It's not human," he muttered. The creature didn't advance. It just stood there, as if studying us, weighing our every move. The silence was absolute, and for a moment, I had the distinct feeling it knew exactly who we were. Not a group of intruders, but marked targets. Sophia took a step back. A dry leaf under her boot snapped sharply. It was like pulling an invisible trigger. The shadow moved with inhuman speed. It didn't run. It glided. The fog split in swirls as the thing crossed the slope in the blink of an eye, closing to within 20 meters of the camp. The ground shook under its weight. Evan let out a choked scream and stumbled backward, knocking over one of the dead sensors. The stench came before its full form, a sour, putrid smell that burned the throat and filled the lungs like rotting meat vapor. Jacob flicked on his flashlight in a split second, and the beam hit the creature. For an instant, we all froze. Its skin, if you could call it that, was pale and almost translucent, as if it had never seen sunlight. It shimmered with a wet sheen, and its eyes, huge, slanted, and completely black, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The two thick toes on its legs matched the footprints exactly, but there was something worse. A second movement behind it. Other shapes, smaller, silent, like obedient shadows. Time seemed to stop. I heard my own heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Jacob took a deep breath, ready to fire, and that's when it made a sound. A gurgling, deep noise like water being sucked through an underground pipe. But behind that sound, there were words. Not human, not articulated, but they sounded like language. That's when I realized it wasn't just hunting us. It recognized us. The roar wasn't loud. It was deep. A sound that seemed to vibrate inside your bones as if it wasn't heard by the ears but felt in the spine. The entire ground seemed to shake with that low frequency, and even the fire recoiled as if the flame itself feared what was approaching. Jacob reacted first. In a swift motion, he activated the rifle-mounted flashlight and fired a warning shot into the ground in front of the creature. The blast echoed through the trees like thunder squeezed into a tight valley. But what scared me most wasn't the sound of the shot. It was its reaction. It didn't flinch, didn't startle. It leaned forward as if analyzing the shot and then let out a guttural snap, a dry sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. In the blink of an eye, it crossed the distance between us and the tree line. "Visual contact," Jacob shouted, stepping back as he fired. The bullets hit something. You could hear the impact, but it was like shooting at rock covered in living flesh. The creature absorbed the shots, staggered slightly, but kept advancing with unnatural movements, as if its joints were assembled backward. Sophia pulled her emergency pistol and began retreating toward the jeep. Evan tripped over a tent rope and fell backward into the muddy ground, his tablet sliding away. The acidic stench grew so strong it stung the eyes and burned the throat. "Shoot the base," I yelled. "The legs," Jacob obeyed. 2 consecutive shots hit the creature's long, disproportionate legs. This time it felt it. A low grunt escaped its throat, and its body swayed for a second. That's when I noticed. It was bleeding, not red blood. A dark, viscous fluid, almost like burnt oil, began oozing into the mud, steaming faintly. "This isn't human," Sophia muttered, her voice breaking. But before we could press forward, other shadows moved behind it. 3, maybe 4, shorter, but equally distorted. They were fast. They didn't run. They glided over the ground, weaving around trees with surgical precision. They were surrounding us without making a sound. Evan, still on the ground, pointed to the slope. "They're flanking us." The air seemed to thicken, harder to breathe. Each inhale came with an almost inaudible hum, as if the environment itself was vibrating on another frequency. The forest, already silent, now seemed to listen alongside them. Jacob held his cover position, but the main creature advanced unhurriedly, as if certain we wouldn't escape. One of the smaller ones leaped over a log and landed less than 10 meters from Evan. Its speed was superhuman. "Fall back to the jeep," I shouted. Sophia fired twice. The bullets pierced one of the smaller creatures and its body twisted like solid mist, vanishing into the trees. It didn't fall. It dissolved. The sound it made as it disappeared was the same wet, submerged snap we'd heard before. Jacob covered me as Evan struggled to his feet. The larger creature took 2 more steps and stopped, tilting its head to the side. The movement was slow, calculated, almost curious. Its pitch-black eyes locked onto me. I swear I felt, not thought, felt, as if it were reading me. Not looking, reading. "It knows," I murmured, my stomach tightening. "It knows who we are." A second later, the final attack began. The creature made a long, silent, heavy leap. Jacob fired into the air as if trying to stop a train. The impact made it stagger half a step, but not enough. The ground shook when it landed. Evan ran toward the jeep, slipping in the mud. Sophia threw a flare grenade. A white flash tore through the forest's darkness. For a moment, we saw everything. The shadows around us were dozens. Not 3 or 4, dozens. Different shapes. Some long and skeletal, others hunched like deformed animals. All had the same pale skin, the same black eyes. The flare's light irritated them, but it didn't drive them off completely. They waited. They measured. They surrounded. Jacob shot me a quick glance. No words needed. He knew. I knew. We all knew. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was a planned hunt. And we were the prey. The flare's explosion faded, leaving an even denser silence. For a second, it was as if the forest had frozen in time. No leaves moved. No sound. Just us and them. Motionless, separated by a curtain of fog and fear. Jacob was the first to break the trance. "Now!" he shouted. We bolted toward the jeep, about 50 meters down the trail, half hidden behind a barrier of rocks and branches. Our feet sank into the soggy mud, and each step sounded louder than I'd have liked. They followed, not running, gliding, as if the ground held no weight for them. Sophia covered the rear, firing at the shadows closing in from the sides. The bullets hit, but nothing stopped them completely. They staggered, distorted their bodies, and kept coming, quieter than nocturnal predators. Evan tripped again. I grabbed his arm before he face-planted in the mud, and pulled hard. At that moment, I felt the air shift behind me, a cutting, icy gust, as if a giant mouth had exhaled. When I glanced over my shoulder, the larger creature was following. It didn't run. It knew it would catch us. The Jeep finally came into view, covered in cold droplets and leaves stuck to the windshield. Jacob yanked the driver's door open and turned the key. The engine took 2 seconds to start. 2 seconds long enough to feel like a full minute. "Floor it!" I yelled. Sophia leaped into the back seat, Evan into the passenger seat, and I slammed the door shut just as something crashed into the side, denting the metal like paper. The creature's roar erupted around us, reverberating through the metal like thunder trapped in a box. The Jeep lurched forward in the mud, skidding as Jacob wrestled with the wheel. The headlight cut through the thick fog, and for a moment, it felt like we were driving through a white sea, unsure where the road ended and the abyss began. The shadows pursued, not like animals. They coordinated, weaving through the trees along the road, keeping their distance and encircling like a trained pack. "This isn't random," Sophia said, panting, staring out the back window. "They're hurting us." Evan typed frantically on the tablet, which had come back online with static-filled interference. "The signals are everywhere. They're spread out in a closed perimeter," he muttered. "This isn't just an attack, and it's a siege." His words made my stomach churn. They knew exactly where we were from the start. This wasn't an improvised ambush. It was planned. And then, the question I'd been pushing to the back of my mind hit me hard. If this was a containment mission, why did they send us alone? Jacob swerved the wheel sharply, dodging a fallen tree that looked like it had been uprooted. Not cut, uprooted. Something that would require immense strength. Behind us, 2 figures appeared in the beam of the rear headlights. Smaller than the main creature, but fast. So fast they were almost glued to the Jeep's frame in seconds. One slammed into the door with such force that the glass cracked into webs. "Hold on," Jacob shouted. I turned with the weapon-mounted flashlight and lit up the thing's faces. Or rather, what should have been faces. It was a grotesque fusion of features. Bones too thin, skin wet and stretched, and eyes so black they looked like holes in reality. One opened its mouth, if that was a mouth, and let out that same gurgling sound, now louder, closer. Sophia fired through the back window. One shot hit the creature's neck dead on. It spun in the air, twisted like wet cloth, and vanished into the fog. The second leaped to the side and disappeared from sight. "They're testing us," Evan said, his voice trembling. "They could take us down now, but they're not." The Jeep jolted forward, and then ahead between the trees I saw lights. Small, white, perfectly aligned in the middle of the forest. They weren't ordinary lanterns. It was as if someone was waiting for us. "That's not a checkpoint," Jacob muttered. "That's a setup." The radio on the dashboard, silent throughout the mission, crackled suddenly. A metallic, cold, unidentified voice spoke. "Keep moving. The unit is active." Repeating, "The unit is active. Proceed to the recovery zone." Sophia looked at me, her face pale. "Recovery zone? This wasn't a hunt?" I felt the answer before I spoke. It was never a hunt. It was a delivery. The road narrowed, and the lights drew closer. The creatures slowed their pursuit, keeping their distance like guard dogs, knowing their master was just ahead. And that's when it hit me. They weren't trying to stop us from leaving. They were guiding us to someone. The white lights emerged among the trees like unmoving eyes, lined up with an artificial precision that didn't belong in that forest. They were cold, perfectly circular, and didn't flicker, just waited. Jacob slowed the Jeep instinctively as the engine groaned against the mud and the road's incline. The radio crackled again with the same metallic, emotionless voice. "Maintain course. You're close. Unit active." That voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. Not to tactical command, not to any official contact. It was almost synthetic, as if a machine were speaking through a human throat. Sophia gripped the window's edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. Evan, still panting, typed desperately on the tablet, trying to find a secure network. Nothing. Dead signal. No external communication. Jacob glanced at me. A brief look, but it said everything. This was a setup. As we got closer, I realized the lights came from metal towers planted in the forest floor, erected with surgical precision. 4 towers formed a perfect square, like a geometric trap drawn in the heart of the wilderness. Between them was a clear circular space, with the ground scorched and sunken, as if something had landed there, or was stored there. The creatures, those that had been pursuing us, stopped at the edge of the light. They stood motionless, scattered in the darkness like guard dogs awaiting orders. Some lowered their heads, others simply dissolved into the fog, as if their role was done. They didn't advance anymore. They didn't need to. In that silence, I noticed the sound of footsteps coming from within the lit circle. Not animal steps. Firm, human, coordinated. 4 figures emerged from the fog, men in unmarked black uniforms, faces covered by smooth masks, no symbols, no flags. 2 carried assault rifles. A third held a device emitting a bluish light, a kind of scanner, and the 4th walked in front, unarmed. Tall, upright posture, like someone who knew they'd been in control from the start. Jacob turned off the engine. The Jeep stopped with a final metallic sigh. No one needed to say anything. We knew. We'd been brought here. Unit Whitaker confirmed, said one of the voices, clear and emotionless, from behind the mask. Operation concluded. Concluded? Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. We haven't even started. The man in front approached the driver's window and leaned down slightly, staring at Jacob through the mask. You never came here to eliminate anything, he said. His voice was low, controlled, devoid of any human trace. You came to clear the way. A low, almost imperceptible hum ran through the ground. It was like an underground pulse, a muffled beat coming from beneath the circle of light. The earth began to vibrate, slow, deep, and the fog around it seemed to retreat, as if something were about to rise from there. Evan stared at the ground and stammered, This isn't containment. This is awakening. The creatures began to move again, not toward us, but toward the center. They lowered their heads as if bowing to something greater. The underground sound grew, rising like the roar of a colossal engine. That's when we saw it. In the middle of the clearing, the ground cracked, releasing a thick fog and a pulsing greenish glow. A massive shape, its contours undefined, began to emerge slowly. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a machine. It was something that had been sleeping there too long. The towers blinked in sync as if feeding whatever was rising. The masked man stepped back, raised a small transmitter, and said with disturbing calm, Unit reactivated. Grayback protocol initiated. Jacob looked at me, and in that look was everything. Anger, helplessness, the certainty that we were never the heroes in this story. We were pawns pushed onto a board drawn long before we arrived. The ground shook one last time. The main creature, the one that had hunted us, raised its head and let out a guttural sound identical to the voice on the radio. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't military communication. It was them talking to each other. I felt the pressure in my chest intensify, as if the air itself were expelling us from that place. But there was nowhere to run. The metallic voice on the radio returned, now cold and crystal clear. Mission concluded. Unit absorbed. Withdrawal unnecessary. Sophia closed her eyes. Evan let the tablet fall to the floor. Jacob kept his hand on the wheel, motionless. And I realized that nothing we'd experienced in that forest was a miscalculation. We were chosen to bring something back to the surface. In that moment, I understood what it means when the government says threat contained. It doesn't mean they eliminated the threat. It means it's now where they wanted it to be. We reached the Devil's Courthouse overlook just before the sun vanished behind the mountain ridges. The sky was covered with heavy clouds descending over the slopes like a thick sheet, tinting everything a dull orange that faded to gray. From up there, the forest seemed endless, layer upon layer of mist-covered ridges stacking into the horizon. The wind cut like a cold blade, carrying the strong scent of pine and wet stone. It was a strange beauty, beautiful like an ancient cemetery at dusk. We set up position near the iron railing surrounding the overlook. Alex adjusted his thermal scope with the precision of someone already expecting to see something they didn't want to find. Rhoda marked coordinates on a portable terminal. Owen, with nervous hands, reactivated the sensors that had failed the previous night. The screen flickered in greenish hues, small pulses appearing in the valley below, vanishing almost instantly. That's not normal, Owen muttered. The signals flared strongly, then disappeared, as if something were hiding its own heat. The sun vanished behind the mountain peaks and the temperature dropped sharply, as if someone had opened a door to winter. Even the wind stopped, and the silence grew thick, dense, pressing on the ears. I leaned against the cold iron railing and scanned the opposite slope. The trees looked like petrified silhouettes, utterly still. Then I saw it. Among the trunks, a shadow moved. At first I thought it was an optical illusion, a darker line blending with the rest. But when it glided between the branches, I realized it was tall, hunched, with unnaturally smooth movements. It was as if the forest itself were pushing it forward, silent, precise. Alex held his breath. "You seeing that?" he whispered. I nodded, tracking the creature as it slid behind a cluster of firs and reappeared 10 meters ahead, as if the space between the trees didn't exist for it. At that moment, an underground sound began to pulse. Low, steady, a deep rumble that didn't come from the wind but from the ground, like a heart beating inside the mountain. The sound wasn't loud, but it invaded the chest and made the ribs vibrate. Rhoda instinctively touched her chest. "What the hell is that?" Alex raised the scope. No heat. Nothing. His voice was tense. "It's like looking at a piece of shadow." The creature paused for a moment, tilting its head to the side as if it knew we were there. Then it accelerated, descending the slope in a straight path toward the gorge. Owen's sensors erupted in red alerts. "It's coming," he said, his voice faltering. Rhoda raised her rifle and fired. The shot cut through the silence like dry thunder, echoing through the valley. The shape vanished behind the trees, and the forest fell silent again. Too silent. Even the echo died too quickly, as if the forest itself had swallowed it. "Did you hit it?" Alex asked, panting. "No," Rhoda shook her head. "It moved before I pulled the trigger. Then came the smell. Iron, rot, copper mixed with decay. We followed the stench down a narrow trail, our flashlights slicing through the dark like scalpels. 30 yards ahead, we found the carcass of a deer, or what was left of it. The hindquarters were crushed and torn, ribs splayed open like petals of a macabre flower, steam still rising from the warm wounds. Alex knelt beside the body. "These aren't bite marks," he said quietly, examining the jagged cuts. "Something ripped this. Something very strong." The silence enveloped us again, heavy, almost solid. I could hear my own blood in my ears. I turned my flashlight toward the overlook and felt the hairs on my neck stand up. It was there, behind us. "There's something," Owen started but didn't finish. The forest exploded in a snap. Branches broke, and a white blur shot through the dark with impossible speed. I caught only fragments, long, pale limbs, bone white. Rhoda shouted and fired again, but the sound of the shot was swallowed by the night. The thing didn't move like an animal. It was as if space itself gave way as it passed. Alex was muttering my name, too quietly, as if afraid another voice might answer. We backed toward the trail to Looking Glass Falls. The darkness closed in like a narrow corridor. Every few meters a white flash appeared among the trees, too fast to aim, too tall to be human, too certain to be chance. The forest seemed alive around us. Alex took the lead, rifle aimed forward. The sound came before the sight, a low, guttural roar that didn't echo. It went straight into the body, vibrating in the bones. Then the smell, copper and rot mixed with something chemical like burnt plastic. "Keep moving," I shouted to Owen. "Don't stop for anything." We reached the clearing near the falls, just as the last trace of light vanished from the sky. The force of the water masked any other sound. The mist filled the air like smoke. For a moment we thought we'd lost it, until Alex looked down. In the mud, right in front of his boot, was a deep footprint. 2 long toes marked in the ground, with water still pooling in the impression. Fresh. He didn't even have time to finish his curse. A lateral impact hit Alex with brutal force. He flew to the side, rifle spinning in the air, and landed in the mud. I shouted his name, ran, and pulled him by his tactical vest. But his arm was torn from top to bottom, the cut too clean for claws, too heavy for a knife. Owen dropped a flare. The cylinder rolled down the slope until it stopped at the base of a rock. The red light spread like blood through the vapor, tinting everything crimson. And that's when we finally saw it in full. It stood beyond the circle of light, tall, at least 7 feet. Its arms hung too long, fingers dragging in the mud. Its knees bent backward like a deer's, and its skin, translucent, almost transparent, revealing veins pulsing in a faint blue glow, like a heart illuminated in the dark. The head looked human, but stretched, with an elongated snout, and an oversized jaw. Its eyes were dark voids. Nothing about that creature was natural. Then it screamed. It wasn't just a sound, it was pressure, an invisible wave that swept through the clearing, making the trees tremble and the rocks vibrate. The roar echoed through the valley as if the mountain itself had spoken. Rhoda reacted first. 3 precise shots to the chest. The creature staggered but didn't bleed. Its skin rippled, absorbing the impact like a wave in a dark lake. I fired too, aiming for the chest. It took a step back but stayed upright. Owen was shouting something, but the roar of the falls drowned out all words. With her magazine empty, Rhoda grabbed a thermite grenade, pulled the pin, and ran straight at the creature. Her strike was sharp, precise. She shoved the grenade under its ribcage just as it tried to grab her. The explosion was like lightning. We were thrown to the ground, the air filled with smoke and hot metal. When I managed to open my eyes, the creature was in flames, walking slowly toward the water. The fire clung to its body like a living fluid. The sound it made wasn't a scream. It was a long sigh, like a first breath. The mist turned the flames into a glowing curtain. It took one last step, fell, and lay still. The water hissed as it touched the burnt skin. The roar of the falls reclaimed the valley. We didn't speak for long seconds. No one needed to. The body was there, real, physical, dead. Rhoda was on the ground, coughing, her hands burned. Alex, leaning against a rock, bled uncontrollably. Owen knelt beside the corpse, eyes wide, as if he still couldn't believe it was real. "We did it," he murmured. "No," I cut in. "Don't say that." Because there was another sound. Low, steady, breathing from the water. Below the falls, the river's surface pulsed with a blue glow, the same that ran beneath the creature's skin, as if whatever was down there was still alive. Hours later, we reached the Pisgah ranger station with the first pale rays of morning. My hands trembled so much I could barely reload my pistol. The parking lot was already filled with unmarked trucks, men in black uniforms, and containment teams in biohazard suits. They worked in absolute silence, fast, coordinated, precise. One of them stared at me closely. "Good work," he said, without emotion. "We'll take it from here." They dragged the creature's body under thick tarps marked with biohazard symbols. Even through the plastic, the blue glow was visible, pulsing slowly like a sleeping heart. By afternoon, locals started asking questions. The official response came hours later. Chemical leak, possible mass hallucination. Rhoda was taken to the hospital in Asheville, her hands bandaged up to her elbows. Alex didn't speak, just stared blankly out the window, as if trapped in that thing's scream. Owen submitted the report by late afternoon. A clean sheet, no details. He left his badge on the table. He didn't come back. I was left alone in the depot packing up the equipment. The forest outside seemed calm again. The wind blew, birds sang, everything as if nothing had happened. But when I stepped into the yard and raised the thermal scope, I saw a new heat signature, small, fast, on the ridge above. Another creature, watching. They said it ended that night. I murmured to myself, but I saw another coming out of the river. And then the forest went silent again. And I knew why. If you made it this far, comment. I heard the forest breathe in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe, because some stories should never be forgotten, and others perhaps should never have been told.